Think Outside the Lines is a space for anyone ready to stop checking boxes, to step off autopilot, and create the life you actually want, with clarity, intention, and alignment. Whether you're questioning the default path, rebuilding from scratch, or just looking to feel a little more like yourself. My guest today reached the pinnacle of magazine publishing, the kind of resume that looks like an ultimate arrival. But beneath the success, he felt a quiet pull toward a path he couldn't quite explain. This is a conversation about intuition, timing, and what happens when you finally trust the internal nudge to pivot. Join me as we think outside the lines with Peter Moore. All right, Peter, decades at the top of the magazine publishing industry, Playboy, Men's Health, interviewing the Obamas in the White House. That kind of resume looks, at least on the surface, like a rival. But something changed for you during the pandemic. So tell me more about your journey that led to this moment.
Yeah, I feel like I was a super lucky guy because the way I described my career was that I caught a wave of men's magazines and it carried me all the way safely to shore, at which point the tide went out and never came back in. So I was able to make a great career out of my editorial skills and my writing ability and had a lot of wonderful adventures while doing that. And then I could see the whole thing falling apart right around the time when I was laid off from Men's Health, which was at the end of 2016. So writing on wall, in publishing, it's going to become more difficult. And it felt like failure at the time. Right now, it felt like a great career break that I was thrown out of my big deal job. You need a little perspective of time and time's passage sometimes to see what's actually doing you a favor.
Yeah, I do love the perspective of time. I think it's one of those things. I think when you're in it, obviously it can feel like the end of the world or like the greatest challenge, but when you're able to look back on it, it's pretty amazing. So I guess looking back now, talk a little bit about the years before the pandemic. Do you feel like they were a detour? Do you feel like they somehow prepared you for what came next? And maybe talk a little bit about what did come next and what you're working on now.
Yeah, the funny thing about all of this was that and all of us who have careers that were moving forward, we're aware that if you're in time of good fortune, which I was when I was working at Playboy and Men's Health, you're also aware that this isn't like God granted, that it could all go away and that you better have your ducks in a row to plan what's going to happen when it does go away. The funny thing about it was I didn't quite realize that I was preparing, but in fact I was. Because when I was probably 3/4 of the way through my tenure at Men's Health, I started taking art courses in just with the local adult ed in the small town in Pennsylvania where I was living. And there was something about even that first course that I took that was showing me a lot of different media and artwork. And I thought, this isn't exactly good work now, but there are flashes of something promising in there. So even while I was spending all day, every day, writing and talking and editing intensely and unceasingly for 20 years I was at Men's Health, I was realizing that maybe there was another call for me in there. And it certainly didn't happen immediately after I was laid off from Men's Health. It took me some more travel and some more stumbling around until I would just happen to be out to lunch with a publishing world friend of mine who asked me if I'd ever heard of Substack. This is probably 5 years ago now, and I hadn't. And for your listeners who don't know, Substack is a blogging platform, but it's newfangled blogging, meaning you have lots of opportunities to do everything that you want to do in publishing your own work. And for me, that meant a hybrid of cartooning and writing, which I had no idea that I had any facility with. But right after the pandemic struck and all of my freelance work went away, some friends bugged me into writing a memoir, which I did. But then I had caught a wild hair and I thought, it'd be funny if I put drawings with that. And it unleashed this whole connection of my writing in my cartooning. And the role of my cartooning is to make fun of the writer who's writing these stories. So it was an interesting byplay. It became very popular on Substack, and so it is now. And kind of gave me license to explore what will my career look like if I'm a writer-artist rather than a writer-editor. And that, as Robert Frost said, made all the difference.
Mm-hmm. There's so much there to unpack. I definitely want to dive into more of the Substack stuff in a bit because I think there's something really interesting there specifically. But I guess as I think about, you obviously had a long list of accomplishments prior to your latest endeavor, right? And you've said that this is the professional life that you feel like you were meant to lead. What's different about the work now? Because it's still, I think on the surface, it may strike someone as still a creative form of expression. Is it simply that the work is more personal now?
Yeah, I maxed out my ability to speak with other people's voices. That's what you really are as a magazine editor.
Yeah.
I worked for Playboy for 8 years, and the whole time I was there, I was very aware that if they had taken a vote in my college senior class member least likely to go work for Playboy magazine, I would have won hands down because I was a shy guy. I was certainly not any kind of embodiment of Hugh Hefner's Lothario
Yeah.
ways. But but I learned how to even to write for Hef when he was still alive in his voice. I have this, I think it's a form of mental illness that I'm able to take on other people's voices. It happened when I made the shift to Men's Health magazine, which I often thought of as the funniest, useful magazine you'll ever read because it was a very funny magazine, still is, while it was dispensing really good health information. And growing out of that, I became a ghostwriter for various people who we came in contact with at the magazine and wrote books for them, which were very successful, not because I'm wonderful or anything, but because they were famous people who I was writing books for and they could market the books that I wrote. After it is a marker of success in the magazine or the book industry is that you've got a New York Times bestseller. I have 3 New York Times bestseller, and none of them were under my name, which you can imagine. I'm feeling pretty good about myself because these books are selling 500,000 copies. But I'm also thinking, why am I not writing under my own name rather than casting the flash onto these other people? And I don't consider any of the bestsellers that I wrote to be great literature, but they made a lot of money for me. And when the whole magazine industry came crashing down and the book industry was faltering as well, it was the old me that was subsidizing the new me. And if you can work that out, I recommend it to everyone, is to have the old you paying for the stuff that you want to do now, which is really where I stand right now.
Yeah, I really love that. In fact, it's so funny just because I'm struck by the notion that you mentioned that you're at the top of Playboy essentially and making all these decisions, and yet would have been said to be the least likely person to ever end up there. And I just think about how many of us are probably in situations like that at some point in our lives. I worked in gaming for a long time, and like I don't play video games. I can't play video games to save my life, right? And so these people that are making decisions on behalf of other diehard fans of something, if only they knew.
Yeah. And I'm sure that you acquired skills in your gaming part of your career
Sure.
that you could roll over into the next one. And I have no regrets for all those years I spent editing magazines, writing magazines, because it gave me a set of skills that I could apply to this new phase of my life. And I made money at it so I could send my kids to college, thank goodness. If I was trying to send kids to college on a cartoonist pay scale, social services would be arriving at my door asking, this is malpractice as a parent. I did the right thing by my family by working those jobs that I had. But then, as families do, they grow up and the kids move away. And suddenly my wife and I are looking at each other. So now what is this next phase of our life going to be? And that set off a lot of kind of delightful soul searching for us about where in the country do we want to live? What kind of lives do we want to live now? I was asking a lot of questions about what sort of work I was actually put on the planet to do. And those quests are scary, but they're also super fun as you're trying to create the new life and the new you. And that's what I've been about since I was laid off from Men's Health. And gosh, it's a decade ago now. So that's a lot of living and a lot of working that I did in between then and now.
Yeah, I feel like that's such a beautiful story that you get to have. It sounds like you just had so many realizations along the way. And I think the lesson in there too that I love is that you alluded to at the beginning of that last statement was that you never know whatever it is that you're doing now, how it might take you into the next phase. And I feel like that's such a big part of your story and your journey, because you may be working in something now where maybe that doesn't interest you, but the skills that you're developing are absolutely going to be transferable to whatever it is you end up doing next or whatever it is maybe that you're meant to do. And I really like the sentiment behind that.
One of the things that I've come to embrace is that I was so busy going from job to job back in the day. And literally from when I got my first writing job, which was working on a encyclopedia-like thing in New York City, to when they laid me off from Men's Health. That was a good 30 years. And I never spent more than a week or two out in the transition from one office to the next. I was a busy guy for 3 decades. And it was amazing to me the silence that fell over me when the Men's Health job ended. Until you embrace that silence and listen hard to what the silence is telling you, what voices are out there calling to you, what missions maybe you need to be on. None of that came immediately to me, but the silence was so important because for once I wasn't like bashing my brains out against my computer keyboard or my desk. I was actually thinking about things and looking what kind of work other people were doing and listening to what the siren calls that I was hearing to launch my new career ship. All of those things are only possible when you're not so busy that your hair's falling out and you're running to the hospital with stress reactions. Thank you, silence. You delivered me to the place where I am right now.
You said that you were planting seeds for harvest long before you knew what you were cultivating. And I feel like that kind of goes back to what we were talking about before about developing transferable skills for later. What were some of the early signs of that for you specifically? Like, what were some of the small things that you were doing that maybe didn't quite fit your previous identity, but they make sense now?
I took a course in acrylic painting a bunch of years ago now. And I was working on a landscape in that course of a scene that I had visited in California when I was traveling out there. And it had a sort of a 2-lane road going down the middle of the painting and then some mountains behind it. And I quote unquote finished the painting. And I thought, that's all very nice, but how boring is it? It's just yet another landscape. And unless you're Claude Monet, how many more of those do you need to produce? And I'm not Claude Monet, just in case anyone was wondering. But when I was looking at the quote unquote finished painting, I thought about especially boring the road was that went down the middle of it. And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if I put rabbits hopping down the road in one direction and foxes coming down the road in the other, in the sense that predator and prey are actually commuters on their daily trip down this road in California. And when I started adding the foxes and rabbits to the painting, it was thrilling for me. But the people in my class came clustering around and they were looking at me like I was nuts, but they were also laughing when they saw it because of the interactions of the rabbits and the foxes, like looking at each other across the double yellow line. And in that moment, I realized, oh, I see what I should be doing. I should be taking reality and seeing what fun I can have with it through my artwork. So that was the beginning of my career as I eventually, years later, migrated to cartooning. But the message that came to me that day is that reality is malleable. And as an artist, I can do anything I want with it. And all the better if it's funny, because that will amuse me while I'm working on it, but also will attract people who want to look at my artwork. That was in microcosm, a small part of where I am now, which is doing commentaries for NPR and animations. I write a column for the Colorado Sun, which is a cartoon column, basically. And I've got my Substack with 16,000 subscribers, which in the Substack world is a pretty big number. Like, all of these things grew out of my impatience with a painting that I drew. And the solution that I came up with is, if it can't be interesting, at least it can be funny. And that's where I'm living now. And it's a great place to be because I spend a lot of time in my office laughing now because I come up with ideas that make me laugh. And the answer is, yes, indeed, you can tickle yourself. And I'm doing it for a living now.
Are there any other parts of yourself that you feel like you'd been setting aside during all that time in publishing that you're finally getting to experience? I'm definitely getting humor, but is there anything else?
Talking about the things that I'm sad that I left behind, it was great to work on magazine staffs because it was a very social job and I'm a social person.
Yeah.
And it's been one of the challenges I've had at this phase of my career is to come up with colleagues and people who I can bounce ideas off of and people who I can go out to lunch with and that whole social aspect of thing. And Substack is actually great for that because I've made a lot of Substack buddies now. People are doing work that's similar to mine or very different, but we all share that hybrid notion of writing with added to artwork. I'm going to chase that as far as it goes now. And I mentioned earlier a memoir that I wrote and illustrated. It never found an agent, never found a publisher. It successfully launched me in the direction I wanted to go in, though. Beyond the Substack, where I post with 500, 800 word posts with drawings, I'm really developing a list of bigger projects that I want to work on. And I'm hoping that's going to extend me into graphic novels or graphic memoir. And those are the next hills to climb. But it's really sweet to have identified the thing that I want to do and look for new opportunities within it rather than be scratching my head and saying, now what? I don't have to do that anymore. I know exactly what.
I very much love what you said a minute ago about alluding to like creating a community, right, on Substack. And it's fascinating to me because I feel like the internet is used in so many nefarious ways. And I love hearing stories about like its use for good, if that makes sense. That's a lot of what I'm trying to do with this podcast, right? Is build a community of people that are like-minded, that have really good intentions, want to do good in the world, or helping others do good in the world. And so I love that you've also found that through your platform.
Yeah, it's the ugly minority versus the beautiful majority, I believe, in the world. Put me down as a hopeless optimist here.
Yeah.
But I feel like the loudest and most strident voices are the last ones that you want to listen to. And the considered thoughtful ones are really the people who you're going to learn from. There was I follow a guy on Substack called Diamond Michael Scott. And one of the Zen cones that he brings up frequently in his writing is that the people who know don't talk, and the people who don't know talk. And I'm trying to talk in the sense of putting out my message there, but not claiming any special master of the universe for myself, but rather humble reflections on what's funny about the world, what's funny about my life, what moves me, what makes me shed a tear, what makes me feel connected to people. That's another big part of what I do, is not alienating anyone, but welcoming everybody into this big tent of we're all imperfect humans here. Maybe we can find a way to support each other. And you can support each other through laughter, through putting a like on a post, through a smart comment on something that somebody has written. And I feel like, at least in my corner of Substack, it's a very supportive world, and thank goodness for that. So I'm trying to be generous here and live in as big and loving a world as possible.
I think that we need so much more of that right now than we have in the world. And so I love people that are doing their part to try to put that out there. So thank you. And yeah, let's keep it going.
Just that whole thing of people hating on each other.
Yeah.
I think it's all overstated. I think there are strident voices trying to divide us.
Yeah.
And we need to tune them out and find where the connections are. Not to get all interpersonal on you, but I really do believe that that static and noise in our world is as annoying as can be, and we don't have to put up with it. We can choose to live in a different, better world.
I agree with you. I go back and forth between that belief and understanding that it's really the loudest voices that are amplified. And it's often this day and age, the more polarizing voices that are amplified. And then just between going out in the world and seeing the trickle down effects of that. And I use social media for an example. It fascinates me how I'm part of a generation that grew up without the internet. And then I seemingly have adapted well to life post-internet. But I've been fortunate enough to sit back and watch all of it unfold and see how different people are versus specifically how we treat each other now versus how we treat each other 15, 20 years ago. And I wonder how much of that, it's not the negativity. I don't know if it's the polarization. I don't know what it is, but I've noticed that we just don't treat each other as kindly as we used to.
I had an interesting experience. My older son got married in Mexico in December, and I like to think of myself, I love to travel. I'm all about experiencing different cultures, eating foods I've never had before, meeting new folks. And I have to say that I had never been to Mexico until my son forced me to go there because he was getting married. And looking back on it, I spent 2 weeks in Mexico in and around the wedding and met so many beautiful, generous people, from waiters in restaurants to people who helped me out finding my way on the street, to the guy who helped me set up my rental car. I believe that we were among good people there. They wished us well. They wanted the best for us. And it wasn't just around the wedding. It was on the streets of Mexico City, in museums that we went to. We were meeting great people everywhere. And if you look at the world with an expectation that you are going to get along and that you're going to help each other and that you're going to be kind to each other, it's more likely to end up with you having a great experience among people who live in a different culture than you do. They're a great instruction, people that are different. And they were taking it from me too. It was a lot of sharing there as opposed to a one-way give and take.
I want to shift the conversation ever so slightly because I love asking this question to people who are accomplished, because there's people listening right now who are maybe not yet accomplished. And I know that those people often suffer from imposter syndrome. I guess my question for you in there is, to what extent, if ever, have you doubted whether you were allowed to call yourself an artist? And if so, what helped you move past that?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I doubted myself as an artist. I didn't commit to what I'm doing now until 5 years ago. And I've been taking art classes for probably 15 years. So that gives you a look at it. And plus, I see it all the time in people who are sharing artwork who they want to apologize for it. This sucks, I know, but I just want to show it to you anyway. And people do that with their writing all the time too. I feel like we all just need to get over ourselves and say, my work is not going to be the same as yours. My writing isn't going to be the same as yours, but it's something that authentically comes from me. And if you want to pick it up, that's great. If you don't want to, then leave it behind. The thing is that each of us needs to take ownership of the work that we're doing. It's not going to be perfect. Like I said earlier, I'm not Claude Monet, and I never will be, and I know that. But there's something special and different about what I do because no one has lived the life that I have. No one has the same sense of humor that I do. Nobody has the same tone of voice when they're writing that I do. Early on in my time on Substack, I was limping along there with 100, 200 subscribers and trying to find my voice, what sort of posts were going to be good for me on Substack. And it was funny because my wife and I went on we did a circumnavigation of France a few years ago. And we kept on running into Vincent van Gogh everywhere we went because the towns where we were places where he had also lived or where there were museums where his work on exhibition. So I got this idea in my mind that I was going to solve the mystery of the murder of Vincent van Gogh, which was a very amusing idea to me. And I did a Substack post about it. And like I said, this was a time when I probably had 300,000 or 400,000 subscribers on Substack. And I put that post up, and 3 days later, 10,000 people had read. And I thought, oh, so this whole messing with reality is something that can work in a lot of different contexts. So I don't fool myself that I know actually who killed Vincent van Gogh, but my revelation that his sister-in-law did it. Yeah, just people wanted to talk about that and wanted to think about it. And they thought my drawings that I did while I was on this mock quest were funny. I realized that leaning into my sense of humor, combining it with the artwork and the writing, if I hit on the right subjects, people were really going to respond to that. And they did on that post, and I've never looked back from then. It was really when my Substack took off and I started to make a name for myself. So every now and then on the Substack humor rankings, I'm looking down at Dave Barry and Garrison Keillor, and I think, yeah, I did that. But in the beginning, it was like, people thought I was nuts. They knew me from my big ass magazine jobs, and he's doing what now? He's a cartoonist? It was like this massive shrug went through all of my former workmates who are now coming around and saying, maybe he is good at this. And certainly from the results I've had in the last few years, I'm feeling like I made a turn, I refined it, it's working. And that doesn't mean it's done now. I still have to keep on refining it and pushing out to new horizons. But there's a certain amount of do it, suck at it, realize how you suck, get better at it. And then all of a sudden you start getting feedback like, no, you're good at this, which without the early steps of sucking, you can't get good at anything. So I'm grateful for the times that I sucked, taking me to the times when people appreciated what.
There's so much in there that resonates with me personally because even what I'm doing right now is such a departure from where the world that I came from, right? And the corporate world and all that. And I think that it's so important to hear stories like yours and hear people like you speak to that because the world is changing so rapidly right now. And I know that there's so many people listening that are wondering what's next for them. And I love the idea of hearing that it doesn't have to be whatever path you're on. Like you said, there's people that probably looked at what you're doing now initially and were like, what the hell is this guy doing? Doesn't make any sense. But it felt right to you. And there's something really beautiful in that because I think more people need to hear that message. I try to espouse it everywhere I go because I think it's critical right now that people hear you don't have to stick with exactly what you're doing. Try something else. Now is the time to do that. And on the other side of that, I love you just validated a theory that I've always had, which is like all art is so subjective, right? And it's going to land with the people that it lands with. And it's not going, the people that don't get it are never going to get it. And you just have to let that go as an artist, right?
Yeah, really what I'm doing is I'm trying to do the Pygmalion thing and fall in love with the drawings I do, which I often do. It's another sign of mental illness in me. But if you can work your way around to telling your inner critic to shut up, that I've heard enough of you over my whole lifetime, and I'm going to try some things, and I don't care what you think, inner critic, because this is progress I'm going to make on my own. So you can just stand down now, and I'm going to try some shit, and I'll come back to you if I think I need your opinion to criticize me some more. Getting over that feeling that everything needs to be perfect and everything needs to travel the world like Picasso, it's not going to happen. But if you're heeding your own voice and pushing your work in the direction that is enticing to you and exciting to you and that you can build passion over, it doesn't mean that you're like, everything I do is great. That is never going to happen. And there are flaws in anything you do. But if there's an essence to it that is authentic to you and is a voice that needs to get out of you and an audience that you're trying to reach that you have in mind, then all of that can be beautiful stuff. And I think of Roz Chast, who's my favorite cartoonist in the New Yorker. If you look at her drawings, she is most certainly not Rembrandt, but the personality of her work is so unique to her, and the subjects that she takes on are very specially Roz Chast cartoons. That means that she's achieved something for herself that nobody else could do, including Rembrandt. So she can't be Rembrandt, but she can be the very best Roz Chast that she is. She's been doing it for a long time. I've gotten a lot of laughs out of her work over the years, and I so appreciate that she found her voice and what her characters that she draws are going to say to us, and she comes through loud and clear, and that's my ambition for myself as well.
I want to go back to the changing landscape of things. And so I think if I think about a career in publishing, and I guess this is probably true in many industries in 2026, but it used to have a very clear script, right? Climb the ladder, collect the accomplishments, retire with a resume of accomplishments, hopefully. Talk a bit about how that landscape has changed and what role, if any, did that shift play in prompting you to choose something different?
Yeah, so when I graduated from college, and I know this because I counted them, there were 186 magazines in the US, and I sent letters out to 143 of them, trying to launch my career. Now, you couldn't even count the number of publications if you include everything that's online, everything that's on YouTube. There are still some print magazines around here, many of whom hire me to write things for them, which I'm still grateful for. But if anything, it has been a million tiny little pieces that it has all exploded into. And the good news out there is that there are a million opportunities for anybody who has a voice and a way to reach people. The bad news is that all of the money that used to go to the people who wrote for those 183 magazines is now being divided by several million. That is daunting. And like I said earlier, I'm very grateful that this extremely gratifying time in my career has come at a time when I'm not paying college tuitions for anybody. I'm sympathetic to listeners here who are saying, oh yeah, that's fine for him. He already made his money, so now he can have fun being a cartoonist. And to some extent, that's true. On the other hand, there are opportunities for people who have a unique voice, a unique way of expressing it, and you can break through on your own. I think of the novelist Peter Weir, whose books I love, Weir. There's a new movie with Ryan Gosling coming out based on one of his novels. He was an engineer and he knew a lot of things about abstruse subjects. And so he just sat down and started writing The Martian because he had something he wanted to get off his chest and he thought he could tell an interesting story there. Self-published it. It was a bestseller in self-publishing. So he was able to go to, I don't know who his publisher is now, but say, you should give me a boatload of money because this thing is really popular online and it can be popular in standard publishing too. So he's a big deal novelist now. I'm sure he commands millions for every book contract we get. And I think the rest of us are all going to become $1 million novelists. On the other hand, the opportunity is out there and the gatekeepers come in late. If each of us believes in what we do and we're putting the work out there and that's a thrilling enough process and rewarding enough personally, you never know when you might break through and become the next Peter Weir, if that's his name. That may be the Australian director. Anyway, his last name, Andy Weir? Yeah, that's it. There's a Australian director named Peter Weir too. Anyway, each of us is looking for what's that Andy Weir moment in our lives where we have a breakthrough that we manufacture on our own. And it can be a personal breakthrough, and those are great. It might be a financial breakthrough, and those are great too. But the idea is to keep on striving for what your authentic voice is and what your medium is to express that.
Yeah, and I want to dive into Substack specifically because I think that what's happening on that platform right now is pretty significant. And a lot of people listening may not fully understand that yet. We're seeing prominent media figures, journalists, writers, editors, leaving traditional outlets and moving their audiences over there. What do you think Substack in particular offers that traditional media platforms no longer can?
I'm entirely in control of it myself. After I stopped being the top editor at a top magazine, I was really annoyed that there were so many gatekeepers who I had to get past, even though I'd had this career where I'd written bestsellers and won national magazine awards. And I had some 26-year-old punk kid editor saying, nah, we don't want to write that. We don't want to run that piece. You can't do it. On Substack, there's no 26-year-old punk kid telling me I can't write something. I can write whatever the heck I want. When I love that freedom. And it's the freedom that allowed me to blunder through it, but also to succeed at it. Like I said, it's a bad time if you want to make a living like I did as a magazine editor. On the other hand, it's a good time if you have your own creative spark and your own ideas to go onto a place like Substack and see if it finds an audience. And it probably won't in the beginning, but it can as you move along if the voice that you're heeding is true and if it's going to appeal to the many people who are on the Substack platform now. So it's not just a matter of putting it up there and crossing your fingers. It's also a matter of really engaging with that community. I did a lot of collaborations with other Substackers who had bigger circulations than I did, but also liked my work and were willing to let me take the heat off of them for a post and put my own stuff up there. So a lot of the growth that I've had on my Substack has come because I made a buddy, I collaborated with them, I posted stuff of theirs, they posted stuff of mine, I recommended them, they recommended me. It's kind of like the old game of blurbing a book back in the day where you praise author A and author A turns around and praises your book too. That, I don't know how much it ever worked, but it certainly does work on Substack where there are a lot of boats rising together, and we try not to be too mad at Dave Barry and Garrison Keillor for using up all the oxygen in the room with their 40,000 subscribers. It makes my Substack look like a pipsqueak, but compared to where it started, it's not bad. And it's giving me a lot of pleasure to have that out.
Let's go back to the gatekeepers for just a second, because I think there's something really interesting there, because you were once, as an editor, were a gatekeeper, right? And I often hear the argument that you just made that I love and mostly agree with, that there's not some 26-year-old kid telling me I can't publish this. But what were the advantages of maybe not the 26-year-old kid telling you could or couldn't publish something, but like the seasoned editor saying, no, this isn't good enough, you can do better, push you, like that also doesn't exist anymore. Do you worry about any of that with stuff that we are exposed to on the internet?
I'm so sad about it. And fine. Thank you for bringing that up, Sean.
I think specifically as it pertains to journalism, right? I think that's the area that scares me the most.
Yeah. In its heyday, Men's Health was a staff of there were 40 editors and art directors. We had there were probably 5 fact checkers who were on staff and a full staff of copy editors as well. And a lot of my time that I spent at Men's Health and other magazines were tangling with copy editors and fact checkers to make sure that what I was publishing was correct and truthful, but also was technically perfect as far as what the copy editors wanted to do. So they're the technicians of prose, making sure that you don't go off on you're not dangling your modifiers or splitting your infinitives or misspelling words, all that stuff. It was just like, I loved the fact checkers and copy editors at Men's Health because they did such a good job of keeping me from embarrassing myself. So I could reach the audiences I did without fear of cancellation or recrimination because there were very smart people helping me refine that. And I like to think that as an editor myself, that was my goal, was to bring out the best in a piece of writing and an editor and a researcher. And those days were precious and they don't exist anymore. So very often it's a matter of, I'm reading manuscripts from people all the time who want my feedback because they knew I was an editor back in the day. And I will have thoughts about things. And that was a skill that I had that I believe it's largely gone away, not completely, but it's not as present in the world as it was. And you're absolutely right. Part of the terror of these days is that complete inventions and lies and are strewn around as fact. And there's less will to correct them and to find out what the actual truth is rather than the emotional truth of things. So I feel like emotion is taken over from reality sometimes, and emotion can be good when it's love, and it can be bad when it's hate that's spurring the inventions. Here we are. There's a lot to be fearful of in our world, but also a lot to appreciate too.
Absolutely. And I think too about like how the algorithms amplify that in either direction, right? Like I think some of us probably have our feed full of things that are exhaustively fact checked and censored, whatever. And then there's people that don't want that. And so their algorithm looks totally different and their reality looks totally different as a result of that. And I think that maybe I think about that as somewhat with a podcast. I don't have a huge platform where millions of people listen, but I do want to make sure that I'm trying to put the truth out there. And I'm trying to, if someone goes on a tangent about something, I will typically cut that out if I don't think that it adheres to the conversation in a meaningful way or is potentially not true. I don't know. It's a weird landscape that we find ourselves in.
Yeah. And I hope there isn't anything here that you find like you need to cut out wholesale because
not in your conversation.
We still have time though, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's spooky, and the anthropologists call it siloing, in that we all disappear down these black holes that are hemmed around with only the echoes of what we're already thinking. I try to avoid life in the silo myself.
Yeah.
And part of it is really being open to people who have different viewpoints than I do. I feel there are not that many spaces where it feels safe to debate things and discuss things, and in places where we can feel open to change our minds. That's what we need now, is more of a willingness to say, gosh, I hadn't considered it that way, rather than I'm right and you're wrong and I'm not going to talk to you anymore.
Yeah.
It feels like that's what the interchanges are mostly now, is I'm going to talk to the people who agree with me and screw y'all. And it's not the world that the founding fathers of the U.S. imagined, although at that time women didn't have the vote and Black people weren't considered human. We've made progress from the founding fathers, but one thing that we should keep in mind is that pluribus unum is the cry of the land. Out of many, one. And many there is important. We have to be open to all kinds, all ideas, and somehow fashion a way for our culture, our civilization to move forward.
Absolutely. And I've never looked at it that way before. I think is like one of my favorite things I ever get to say. It happens rarely these days, but I do appreciate those moments of clarity. So yeah, I'm with you. And I do try to keep things positive in that respect, because I also agree, like I want to put something positive out into the world, right? I don't want to just focus on the negative aspects of things. What would you say to someone who is thinking about starting their own Substack, maybe starting completely from scratch and doesn't really know where to begin? What would you tell them?
You have to, first of all, go for it is my first instruction. And don't limit yourself, especially when you have no audience on Substack. It's a great time to screw up because nobody will see you doing it. But while you're screwing up, what you might be doing is thinking, I screwed up 40% of that post, but this part was really good and got some response. So maybe I need to lean into that. It was one of my standard pieces of career advice for young people who would come to me and say, you're a big deal editor. How did you get there? And what I would always tell them is that your first job is going to be largely terrible. It might be 96% terrible and 4% good. But what you need to do is identify that 4% so that when you apply for the next job, it will become 16% good and only 84% terrible. And that's kind of how my career went along, was working through the terrible to get to the really cool jobs and positions. And the analogy on Substack is exactly right. You might be blundering around with no audience and no idea of exactly what you're doing on Substack in the beginning when you have 4 subscribers, one of whom is your mom. But if you invest the time in it and you think about it and you analyze what's working for you and what's working for your audience, what makes what you do special and unique on Substack, then that's when you're really starting to feel your way into, this is something that I'm writing that is unique to me, that resonates with other people, and that I can sustain the effort and grow with it. And that's the key. You're never going to get there if you have 4 posts on Substack and get up and give it up. On the other hand, if you make it to your 40th or 50th Substack and you're starting to get some traction there, then you have something to go on. You have a track record and you have your own sensation of what you are uniquely good at, as opposed to what you can leave to other people to do. So I'm not going to write a Substack on politics because honestly, I can't bear to listen to those voices right now. But if I can wander around the world and post, or if I can go to a museum exhibition and tell you what I really love about Claude Monet and also what I find funny about him, then maybe that's going to be something that I uniquely can do and have that hybrid between the art world and my commentary and my humor. Like, all those things seem to be working for me now, and I'm going to stick with them.
Yeah. And I think from my perspective, the most important thing you said in there is keep going. Don't give up. If you believe that it's something that you want to be doing, keep doing it, and it will find its audience eventually. I guess on the other side of that, what about someone who's already established, who knows it's probably the right move, but is maybe apprehensive to actually take that leap? What would you say to them? What's holding them back from your perspective?
Yeah, I would check their bank account first to make sure that the children in the house aren't going to be starving while you do that. That's reality, right?
Yeah.
Where we live. On the other hand, we all have more time in our days than we'll admit that we have. Times when we're goofing off. Like, I've spent times when I'm like way too engaged in sports chatter. I'm a big sports fan. I follow Chicago teams because that's where I lived when I worked for Playboy, and both the Bulls and the Cubs had glimmers of championships in them back then. So I became obsessed with sports. And one time the Cubs had made the playoffs and they produced a highlight reel of their season. And I realized while watching the highlight reel that I had actually seen all of those games. And I thought, this is troubling. This is what I'm spending my time doing. So being honest with ourselves about what we do for relaxation, I'm not going to touch that. But are there things that we get dragged into that are just massive time sucks that would be better spent if we would invest ourselves in whatever that passion, whatever that creative urge we have, if we did that instead? I look back on those Thursday nights when I would go to art class in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, and stumble and bumble around through my first drawings and paintings. That was a really good thing that I did. And it was a little stressful because I was putting myself out there and at times embarrassing myself. But if you can put aside those comfort activities that are major time sucks and replace them with ones that are actually going to advance who you are and who you will be in the future, we all have time to do that without bankrupting our families or starving our children. Take a hard look at how you spend your 24 hours a day in all those days and all those hours in your lifetime of conscious life, and find the things that are really going to add value to your life, as opposed to ones that will merely suck up time until, thank goodness, I can go to bed again. Again, I'm not the be all and end all, but I will point back to that first drawing class or the first art class that I took in Pennsylvania. And that would be at least 15 years ago that I did that. So don't overhype your expectations in the beginning. Give yourself credit for just trying something, and give yourself credit for failing at that something and then trying something else. It's no success comes overnight. You're on the JV team before you make it to the varsity, and you're just a kid dribbling a basketball in your driveway first. All of those stages in your life's development are honorable, and they're worth celebrating, and they're worth appreciating. And just because you're early on in the journey, don't deprecate that journey. Give yourself credit for taking step by step as you go along the line. And at some point, if you keep on walking, even though there may be reversals, you need to start over again, you're going to find yourself down the line a little bit with a different perspective and different skills than you would have had you not done all of that. So had I gone to lunch with my friend and said, Substack sounds nice, but it's going to be hard to be a success on there, I never would have started it. And who was it? Leo DeRocher, you lose 100% of games you don't play. You lose 100% of life initiatives that you don't start.
Yes, to all of that. But what has you hopeful about the world right now?
I've been reading a book that I'm not going to remember the name of right now. Oh, the book is called I Never Thought of It That Way. And one that book talks about is opening yourself up to conversation, correction, reevaluating what you think. One of the points that the author made was that she cited a study of how one side of the political divide in the U.S. regards the other side of the political divide in the U.S. and vice versa. And everyone on one side said, all those people hate me. Everybody on the other side, those other people hate me. When you came down to asking them, do you actually hate those people? They said, no. People are living their lives. They come up with their own opinions, and that's okay with me. So it's like, I think we all overstate the divide that there is right now. And that if we're just willing to reach out and listen to each other more and shout less, I feel like that's going to get us out of the current divisive world. And I'm hopeful by that stat about how we're being set up to feel more divided than we actually are. And I feel like we should reject that narrative and reach out to people and listen to them and see what we can learn and sympathize. There are reasons why people feel the way they do based on the life that they've lived. And there's honor in that too, if we can offer them our sympathy and empathy.
Yeah, I think it's Obama that says all the time, we have more in common than what divides us. And I wish that more of us would refrain to that more often. Peter, thank you so much. This conversation has been just a real reminder that I feel it's never too late to let what's been inside you all along finally come forward. Thank you for your candor and your honesty. And please let our listeners know how they can connect with you and find your work.
It takes a lifetime. That's why we're given lifetime.
Absolutely.
To find the place where we're meant to be. And where I'm meant to be right now is Peter Moore, one word, petermoore.substack.com. All of my work eventually finds its way into my Substack. Take a look. If you like it, subscribe. If you really like it, pay me for your subscription. If you don't like it, there's a whole big world out there for you to explore without me.
Thanks for spending some time with me today. Choosing to step off autopilot and think differently about your life takes work, and I don't take it lightly that you're here. If today's episode resonated, the best way to support the show is to share it with someone who might need to hear it. And whenever you're ready to go deeper, whether through free worksheets, guided audio reflections, or one-on-one coaching, you can find everything over at thinkoutsideTheLines.com. Be well, and I'll catch you next time.